I feel like now might be an appropriate time to fess up to the fact that I'm actually half Hungarian. Or technically half bloody Hungarian. It's the technical term. And I had no idea that it was such an influential thing in becoming a massage therapist until today. So, well, there you go. All right, so I want to tell you a story about a polar bear with an existential crisis. He's just a bit concerned about and confused about his identity. So he goes up to his sister. Let's call her Hildegard. I don't know why. Hildegard, the polar bear. And he says to his sister, "Am I a polar bear?" And his sister says, "Yeah, of course you're a bloody polar bear." So he thinks about that for a while, but thinks it's only my sister. I'll go and talk to a higher authority. So he goes off and talks to his mum. And he says, "Mum, am I really a polar bear?" And his mother says, "Yeah, of course you're a polar bear. You know, here we are on the North Pole. You're a polar bear. What else do you think you might be?" So he thinks about that for a while, but decides, I just need a third opinion. I usually get second opinions, but I want a third opinion. So he goes off to his grandmother and he says to his grandmother, "Grandma, am I a polar bear?" And his grandmother says, yeah, you're a polar bear. Why do you ask? And he said, "Well, I'm just curious. If I'm really a polar bear, why the fuck am I so cold?" Now, believe it or not, that's not the first time I've told this joke at an AMT conference. I opened a speech in an AMT conference in 2008 with the exact same joke. So I'm repeating myself, and that's a very worrying sign. But the reason I wanted to repeat it was because at the time, I think I was in Melbourne. Yes, I was in Melbourne, and I was cold. No, I wasn't cold. But a lot of the things that I was talking about on that day, 8 years down the track, I think we still struggle with. And I was interested in Max referring to inferiority and having an inferiority complex. And I do think that we are still, for some really quite unfathomable, and can I say non-evidence-based reason, we're still quite dogged by this crushing sense of inferiority, like somehow we're not adequately valued or viewed in the sense that we'd like to be. And I think some of that is about being reflected through somebody else's lens. So we're kind of seeking approval from the medical hegemony or something like that, I'm not sure. But I kind of felt like it's worth considering that issue of identity again, because I think largely that it can inform where we head in the future, and it is an issue that apparently is ongoing and needs to be addressed. And I think it comes from a combination of internal and external factors. But I think in its origin, it's partly about the fact that from the very get-go in the modern era, we have always sat somewhere along a continuum between art and science. And we've always had a lot of trouble reconciling where we are along that continuum. And I think that now more than ever, there are things that are happening out there in the big wide world that are going to help us reconcile that kind of position of unease. And I look to the kind of stuff that Tasha Stanton was talking about this morning, and to me that is kind of a path that shows that it is okay to sit in that pocket between art and science, that science actually is going to a point where it's becoming something that looks more like art, to be honest, that we're dealing with this really complex organ called the brain, and we're kind of starting to examine some of the assumptions that we've had about how the body works and how pain works. So I just wanted to kind of introduce that theme as a way of introducing the rest of what I want to talk about today. Before I kind of move forward, I just wanted to briefly move back again, and I'm only going to be very quick because we don't have a lot of time. So I just wanted to talk about two of the major things that we achieved under our last strategic plan. The first one obviously has been referred to many times a day, so I'm just going to refer to it in passing, but it's the AMT Code of Practice. And can I just get a show of hands? Has anyone read it in the last month? Oh, that's pretty cool. Bits of it. And, well, no, not the whole thing, just referred to it for any reason in the last month. So I don't mean that you sit down with a cup of tea at the end of the day and go, I know, I need a good book. Let's read the Code of Practice. The one thing that I just wanted to note about that document, there's a whole lot that I could say about it, but the one thing that I think is quite a profound statement is that that document gets downloaded from our website 2,200 times approximately every month. So that's fairly astonishing. That's kind of quite a fairly significant thing. The other thing that I wanted to note that was part of the last strategic plan that was kind of forced on us in a big hurry. It was something that we wanted to get done, but there was always other things to do. But the establishment of that classified research database became a matter of huge urgency when the Chief Medical Officer made the call for us to provide evidence of the efficacy and safety and cost efficiency of massage. And we got that call from the CMO. We knew it was coming, but the actual formal invite came about 3 weeks before Christmas, and it was meant to be submitted by December the 22nd. It's like, why, iota? So that was a big scramble to get that together, but I do want to just quickly acknowledge that it was me who did the first round of that database, but the person who's kept that current and up to date since that first iteration is Dana Scully. She's not here today, and I'm not talking about Special Agent Dana Scully either. It's not the same person. What a talent she would have. So I just wanted to note that they were two really, really significant things that we achieved as part of the last strategic plan. And sometimes when you make those big steps, they can become quite invisible, and I think it's worth kind of considering that they were fairly big leaps forward for us, and we should never take them for granted. Yes, we've always had codes of ethics and standards, but those two, I think, really dragged us very significantly into a kind of new domain. The other thing that was a commitment in our last strategic plan that's ongoing is this concept of fostering and promoting research in massage therapy. And the one thing that I wanted to focus on today, which we haven't spoken about a lot because we weren't actually aware of where things were at ourselves, is the research study that we've been undertaking with ARCCIM for the last, it's probably 3 or 4 years now. So that research study, in case you've forgotten because we haven't talked about it for so long, is investigating patient attitudes and expectations in terms of how they view massage therapy and how they view massage therapists. So that embarking on that study was the culmination of a lot of conversations with Professor John Adams that kind of probably occurred over close to a decade, I don't know, many cups of coffee and that kind of thing. And we eventually committed to moving forward. So the study consists of 2 arms. The first arm we completed way back in 2004. It was a workforce survey. So can I just have a show of hands of how many people actually can remember participating in that workforce survey? Yeah, so we had a few people. So the first phase was getting this workforce survey done, and basically we had 680 responses, which at the time was around about a third of AMT's membership. So we have this big pool of information that builds on other smaller surveys that we've done in the past about various aspects of working in the massage therapy profession. So it's stuff like how many hours a week do you work and how many years have you been a massage therapist and that kind of thing. And one of the things I do want to note, because there's been some ongoing discussion over the last 2 days about burnout rate, but when you look at the data from our workforce survey, a lot of people in AMT have been working as massage therapists for 5 years at least. There's a lot of long-term career stuff going on. So unfortunately, we don't know a lot about what the actual burnout rate is. We don't have real data. There's a lot of myth and there's a lot of rumour and there's a lot of conjecture, but we don't know the reality. So if our data is anything to go by, there's a lot more long-term careers than we gave credit to. So the other part of this particular study is a patient survey. And I'll just give you a quick overview of the structure of that survey. So we picked 5 big metropolitan cities across the country. So Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. They were going to be the centres of our research. There was a reason why we picked metropolitan areas, and that was because the organisation that we're doing it with, ARCCIM, which is the Australian Research Centre in Complementary and Integrative Medicine, already have a fairly massive pool of data from regional areas. So We already have a lot of information from regional areas, which is why we picked big metropolitan cities. So we recruited from the workforce survey therapists who were willing to host this research in their practice. And the basic principle was that if anyone put their hand up to do it, a couple of things had to happen. First of all, they had to be compared against the workforce survey data to see if they were typical of what data emerged out of that. So if they were outliers in terms of the number of people they treated or how much they earned or something like that, they weren't included. And this is really important because when I get to some of the data, you're going to say, yeah, but that's not typical, but it is. So basically, we needed the people who were involved in volunteering to host the research. We needed them to fit a particular kind of average profile. And that meant that they were putting up their hands to host a research assistant to come in and basically exit interview 10 consecutive patients. So it probably happened over a couple of days in most people's clinics. There's a couple of days of patients being exit interviewed. So at the moment, we don't have final data from that because we're being a little bit held up by some stragglers getting their data back. And also, sadly, so if I can use this as a recruiting opportunity, we need clinics in Perth. But for the first time a couple of weeks ago, I actually saw some of the data and seriously, I thought I was going to fall off my chair. It is astonishing. So one of the questions that's asked of patients when they're being exit interviewed is what of the following conditions? So we had a list of conditions. Which of the following were you seeking treatment for today? So people were allowed to make more than one choice. But I can tell you right now that of the patient surveys that we've got back, 50% of people were seeking treatment on that particular day for lower back pain. I think that's astounding. 60% of people, so that doesn't add up because people were allowed to choose more than one thing. 60% of people were seeking treatment for any kind of pain-related condition. So there was this category called other, which is just loaded with really specific presentations. So it could be, someone might say heel pain, someone might call it more technically, plantar fasciitis, but there's a long list of kind of general pain conditions. So 60% of people on that day attended with some kind of pain. Now, just to take a little sidestep for a second, if we are ignoring the learnings that are coming out of the research from pain neuroscience, we do that at our own peril because we are out there treating a ton of pain. Now, some of the things that came out, so we actually also asked people about headaches. So on that day, 10% of people had turned up with a headache. Of the pain people, 30% were chronic pain sufferers. So there we are in that territory firmly that Tasha was talking about today. A couple of the stunning things that were actually a slight shock and a little bit disappointing of the surveys that we've had returned, nobody was attending on the day to have anything related to insomnia. And that's a fairly shocking statistic, I think, because so many of the conditions that we treat are intimately connected with quality of sleep. So whether we're not sending out the right message or the clients that we treat are not making that connection in their own head, nobody was seeing anyone for insomnia-related issues. And that's disappointing also because we actually have a reasonable body of evidence that covers a range of conditions, including management of cancer pain, that shows that sleep is one of the quality outcomes from massage therapy. It's also really important because poor sleep is linked to very, very poor pain outcomes. So it's something for us to think about. Why are we sending out this message that maybe is a sort of betrayal of our original holistic roots? Why are we treating too much of something sort of obvious that's presented rather than still looking at the whole person and their whole life and lifestyle elements and stuff like that? The other thing that was enormously disappointing was that on that particular day, only 5% of people were attending for anything to do with a mental health condition, so specifically anxiety and depression. Now that to me is a signal that we've gone massively in the wrong direction sometime over the last 15 years. And I think what's happened over the last 15 years, if I had to summarise, is that we have, for various internal and external reasons, massively biomedicalised. So it's a fairly pragmatic response to, first of all, a really growing agenda of evidence-based medicine, but it's also probably getting us back to a point we've been at before, where we originally split into the physiotherapy discipline, where we're actually making a decision that is based maybe not on whole person treatment, but based on aligning ourselves with the medical hegemony. So I think we're very much at risk of doing that again, and this data was a little bit kind of, whoa, that's a big deal. So we also asked a question about what people had previously used massage therapy for, and again, a whopping 70% at some time had used massage for lower back pain, 30% at some time had used massage for headache, 45% had used massage for chronic pain at some point. So that's a ton of pain that is out there we're dealing with. Neck pain, huge as well, 65%, not surprising, current society. Again, the same data on insomnia and anxiety and depression. Very few people are now seeking treatment for those things. One of the biggest messages to come out from the whole survey more generally, though, is basically that the public does not see massage as CAM. They just don't see it that way. So I think that's really interesting because it does give us a bit of a quandary. We've kind of traditionally been lumped under this very large CAM umbrella, but it's not a reflection of what the public thinks. Now here's the one. Oh, complementary and alternative medicine. Sorry, I thought that was well known. My apologies. So the public doesn't see us as part of complementary and alternative medicine. They see us as very, very mainstream. And we've known that anecdotally for a long time, but this data really, really bore it out quite clearly and dramatically. Now, here's one that really nearly made me fall off my chair. One of the exit interview questions was what the patient on that day's perspective was on the years of training that their massage therapist had undertaken to become a massage therapist and to be in practice. So it was basically what's your perception of the training that your massage therapist today has? Hands up if people think that most people said it's less than 1 year. Okay. What about 1 year? Hands up people who think patients thought that the massage therapist they saw on that day had 1 year of training. Okay. What about 2 years? Any advances on 1 year? 2 years? Can I have some 2 years? What about 3 years? Does anyone think that massage therapists are perceived by their patients to have 3 years of training? Anyone out there? Okay, what about more than 3 years? Well, you win the prize. 65% of patients who attended a massage on that particular day that they were exit interviewed thought that their massage therapist had more than 3 years training. Yeah. That just gobsmacked me. I mean, that's probably the best news that you could really want to hear. And I think the thing that I just want to note about that is that it's really easy to get focused on what's going wrong, and it's really easy to get into that, crushing weight of we're not valued, we're not respected. But that says a completely different thing. That tells a completely different story, that patients are coming to see massage therapists and their perception is that they have more than 3 years training. I find that quite stunning. So I think, we can get very, very focused on what goes wrong with vet standards and vet education, and we get kind of obsessed with dodgy RTOs, and we're always sort of saying, oh, they're really dodgy or they're not well trained. But before you say, well, these people who put up their hands are unusual, they're not typical of the industry, as I said earlier, they were modelled against the average from the workforce survey. So these are not outliers. And I just think that that's the most fantastic news, and that says something quite profound and deep about the regard that the people that we treat hold us in. And I think it's worth thinking about that when we're getting into that mode of this crushing inferiority, that we need to think that that's probably not actually a reflection of what's out there. And maybe we need to think really carefully about whose approval we seek. And it turns out that we already have the approval of the most important people, and that is the massage therapy going public. Anything else is a little bit secondary, I think. So then one of the other questions we asked was there was a list of things that I can't go through in complete detail because I don't have time, but which of the following things were you influenced by in getting treatment on that particular day? So a whopping 62% said that one of the influential factors was that they preferred a natural approach to treatment. Now, I don't know about you, but that makes me very anxious about biomedicalising, because people are turning away and they're seeking alternatives, not in the wacky woo way, but alternatives in that I need to do something else because I'm not getting the answers that I seek. Along with that, 40% said that they were coming to get treatment for massage or from a massage therapist because conventional medicine had not worked for them. So that gives you evidence of people looking for other solutions other than basically sort of the conventional medicine paradigm. Now, the other thing that was of particular interest to me, and I was kind of interested in terms and talking about the early days of us lobbying health funds, because I have had cause so many times to regret that AMT ever got involved in doing that. Most of them to do with Medibank, but let's not talk about that. So, only 34% of clients who attended on the particular day that they were exit interviewed said that having health fund coverage was an influencing part of their decision to seek treatment. So that's a fairly phenomenal statistic as well. Now, it seems to me that there's a number of opportunities that we have, and these are not necessarily things that I've highlighted in terms of actual data, but one of the messages that has become clear out of this survey, and certainly I think for many people in the room today, must have become clear listening to Tasha Stanton, is that we have a big opportunity to be capitalising on the time that we have with clients and the knowledge that we have to be very much more actively involved in patient education. Now, the survey clearly shows that's already happening. It's happening to a great extent, but I think there's the opportunity to capitalise on that even more. Also, we asked some questions about, what things were discussed in the appointment. So lifestyle advice was a big factor in the consultations. Most people had at some point discussed some form of lifestyle advice or exercise prescription with their therapist on that day. 70% of people said that they were quite comfortable with the idea of talking about chronic pain with their massage therapist, and same with acute pain. 70% said we're comfortable talking about acute pain. So again, the message is that we should not have kind of cognitive dissonance around where pain neuroscience is leading, and that we should probably be very cautious about feeding too much into what I think we've fallen into the trap of, which is this very... Anyone know Descartes? I think, therefore I am. A lot of biomedicine for the last couple of centuries has been based on this idea of the body being separated into body and mind. And the organisation that Tasha is involved with is called Body in Mind. So that's a pretty profound one single word change that makes a very, very big impact. So I think we need to be very careful about buying in too much to that pain equals tissue damage, there must be something biomechanically wrong, your posture's not good. All of those messages that we've kind of built over time that maybe are really profoundly unhelpful and show that we've maybe taken at some point a wrong turn. I think for me personally, you may not all agree, but I think the survey shows a clear opportunity to break free from the tyranny of private health funds. So... That's definitely worth a round of applause for sure. Now, moving right along, this is actually a study that was only released last week. So this is not our survey anymore. This is not our research. This is another piece of research that was done by the Australian Research Centre in Complementary and Integrative Medicine, and literally hot off the presses. But that has some stunning statistics in it as well that were quite shocking. So it's a study on back pain, and the data that has been synthesised in this particular study is taken from the Australian Longitudinal Women's Health Study. So the Australian Longitudinal Women's Health Study has been running for 20 years. It actually recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. And the women in that study were recruited from Medicare data. So there was 15,000 women recruited in the first phase. It's recently had a whole new round of recruitment and funding, so that's actually really good news. But you can imagine that there is 20 years of a gold mine of data that can be made use of. And the surveys that these women have been completing as part of this study regularly they're not small. They are massive, massive surveys. So there is just a phenomenal amount of information in these data. But this back pain study that ARCCIM's just synthesised is essentially about what dictates people's choices in terms of the practitioner they see first. So what's of interest is not, I don't think this is so much of interest to us, but I suppose it is. There's a correlation between the severity of the pain and the tendency to pick a GP first. That makes sense, right? But the less severe the pain, the more likely it is that you will pick another therapist. So in terms of frequency of consults, who do you reckon is top of the pile? It's us, yep. 43%. We outgun both physio and chiro by 7%. So again, whose approval are we seeking? And does that show you that you're not valued and what you do is not valued? Because I think that would be a very bizarre reaction to that data. The other interesting statistic was that in terms of frequency of consults, 58% of people went to any kind of medical doctor. So that means a GP or a specialist or the whole gamut. So that was the pattern of frequency of consults in relation to back pain. Overall, any allied health practitioner, so physio, chiro, any of the other allied health disciplines, pharmacists, you name it, the frequency of consultations for lower back pain was 54%. And then there's this category called AnyCam. That sounds good, doesn't it? AnyCam. So AnyCam refers to any complementary or alternative medicine consult. Anyone got any wild guesses to what the percentage was? Oh, very close, very close. So 75% frequency of consultations to a CAM practitioner, of which obviously massage is significantly at the top of the pile. So we're actually outgunning medicos by a clear margin of 20% in terms of frequency of consultations. Does that not gobsmack you? Just amazing. So I guess my question to you would be, and I'm not talking about, again, the kind of extreme, and I hate this term, but the extreme woo end of alternative therapy. But I would question our headlong race to biomedicalise in a hurry, because I think all of this points to a clear direction, which is people are seeking alternatives and people are flocking to us in huge numbers. So I guess I just think that we need to be really careful about how far we go down a path that maybe is trying to ride the crest of a wave that's long since broken to shore. So in terms of where to now, I know I don't have long to talk about this, so I'm going to be really, really quick. The AMT board has started establishing a strategic plan to guide us forward, and it's not actually finalised, so it's a bit of a misnomer to call this the launch of the strategic plan. But it's going to sound like a very lofty and abstract ideal, because it is. One of the commitments that's been made as a kind of guiding principle for the new strategic plan is this concept of back to the future and bringing a really firmly patient-based agenda back into the centre of the frame. So becoming kind of going full circle and coming right back to the thing that we were always really good at, which was extraordinary patient-centred care. And that also means just bugger off with the insecurity. You know, I can't endorse Max's statement any more heartily. We don't need the insecurity, we don't need the lack of self-esteem, because if you look at it from an evidence perspective, there is no reason and no basis for any of that. So there's a slight shift in some of the terminology around our vision. So instead of concentrating on a vision of being considered to be allied health professionals, we're concentrating more about the role of massage in primary care. And it turns out, according to that data, that that's quite an important thing to do, because we are effectively, whether the government needs or wants to acknowledge it or not, and whether the biomedical community wants to acknowledge it, we are effectively working in the domain of primary care if we are dealing with this ton of pain. So I think basically it's kind of a matter of waiting for, and it's happening now, waiting for the science to come back to where we always lived, which was in this incredibly holistic model of care that took the whole person into account in treatment, not just a set of presenting systems that turned up on a particular day. And that's where healthcare philosophy is heading back to. That is where all of the science is pointing to now. It's no longer woo, it's actually... We're finally kind of breaking the shackles of that dualistic idea that the body and mind function separately, and, you know, they talk to each other but they don't kind of operate. It's this well-synthesised whole. So obviously talking about putting care back into the centre of the agenda is a really abstract thing, and you know, I've had a cause to panic and think, how do you make that a reality? So how do you turn that into something that means something? And I think basically the first step for AMT is to make sure that we're really invested in the care and wellbeing of our own members. And we like to think we always are, but I think you always need to look at strategies to make sure that you really are. So one of the things that we are starting to focus on, and it started off very much, and still is at this stage, a fairly guerrilla campaign, but you will see it becoming more formalised as the months go past and, you know, we have a bit more time to focus, is that we're very much focusing, even though we're not a union, we're focusing on industrial relations issues quite actively. Because for those of you who attended Ross's presentation yesterday afternoon, it's become something we can't ignore and blindingly apparent that there is an epidemic of sham contracting out there. There's an epidemic of unstable and unlawful employment conditions, and we can't turn a blind eye to it. We have to actively address it, and we have to get out there and be a little bit bolshy, literally, about how we do that. So we've kind of, I think we've captured the bolshy phase fairly well. So it's just a matter of moving to the next phase, which I don't think it's ever going to get too much more polite. But I think I would just like to say, as a kind of side note to this, that addressing the unstable employment opportunities also means that we have to name and acknowledge that all of the Ubers of massage that are cropping up are not our friends. And all of the on-demand services for massage therapy, they are not our friends. And in fact, what they are doing is seeing an opportunity, and they're probably doing it a lot more sensibly in their attitude. They see the demand for massage, they see the public's love of massage, and they are grabbing the opportunity, but we're getting caught up in the wash and we're actually being employed under circumstances that are not okay. And what we really want to focus on is building stable, long-term employment opportunities for people. So that's, you know, kind of one of the specific projects that we're working on. The other thing that's very much in development, but fairly, you know, nascent in terms of its development at the moment, is we're trying to work on a really, really solid coaching system. So that's going to be in the first phase targeted at students and trying to sort of build a better transition from students into employment. And I guess those two talk to each other, those two particular projects. If we can build more long-range employment opportunities, then that's going to be a great thing for students graduating. But trying to line them up with experienced therapists who might help them to sort of better identify opportunities and not be vulnerable out there in the marketplace and not become one of those statistics of, you know, study, last 2 years, and then just go, I can't do it. So just to finish, I guess I'd like to finish with the message, and it's a slightly unusual message, but I think to address the identity issues that we have and this self-esteem issue that we have, the answer is quite obvious, and that is that we have to start working from the platform of an evidence-based identity. And clearly, I hope you've got the message from what I've said today that there is plenty of cold, hard data to support that we are valued, that we do good work, and that we really have no reason to feel that kind of sense of, what about us? We're not recognised. What do we need to do? So please do think about that when you kind of feel like your poor second cousin to another healthcare practitioner. In the eyes of your clients, and in the end, they are the most important person. You are not a second-class citizen, and we need to just wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and go, yeah, that's all cool. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and it's been a blast. Thank you.